Well, warm welcome to today's talk, Friday the 28th of January. Now, yesterday I'm aware that I was somewhat bombarding you with numbers, so we're not going to have numbers today. It's going to be a bit of a different approach because I've actually been studying an article that's concerned me quite a lot. Now, this is the British Medical Journal. I'm a regular reader, of course. It first came out in 1840, even before I was a student, so it's been out for quite some time now. A very reputable journal, and they've recently published this article here. Now, I haven't got the paper copy of this yet because it's not. It's just a new paper. But this is COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. We must have raw data now, and the full article's there, and it is well referenced. So, what is this about? Well, the authors of this article in British Medical Journal seem very concerned that we're not being given enough data on vaccines and treatments in COVID-19, and of course this is absolutely critical. But let's go through the paper because it does explain it remarkably well, and it is somewhat concerning. I've always had to be really careful about what I say about vaccinations and treatments because we have needed this vaccination program. It's absolutely essential. But maybe it's time to start asking the question has the risk-benefit analysis dynamic moved slightly? Not coming to any conclusions on that, but I think it's a question that we should keep in our mind. We need to keep renewing the information so it's up to date. But anyway, let's look at this article. COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. We must have the raw data now, sort of the granular data, the original data from the clinical trials. Data should be fully and immediately available for public scrutiny. And I agree completely. Why would we not want a complete peer review process? Now, as regular viewers all know, I get things wrong quite often, and I'll go back and apologise or clarify or whatever's necessary because you're peer reviewing me, and we all need this. We all need this peer review, and the more eyes on this data, the better. Now, it takes pretty specialised eyes to review this data, but the world has some brilliant pharmacologists and statisticians that would be more than willing to review this data if they were allowed to get it and explain it to the rest of us. And then if you get statisticians in New Zealand agreeing with statisticians in Australia, agreeing with pharmacologists in America, agreeing with doctors in Germany, agreeing with empirical scientists or whatever it is in the UK, and they're all agreeing, then that makes me much more inclined to think that we're actually onto something definitive. But to do that, we simply have to have the raw data. And are we getting the raw data? Now, background to this, 2009 to 2012, I remember being part of the, I was more of an observer really, but in Cambodia there was a big vaccination campaign for the H1N1 in those times. So I was kind of around there, but at that time there was a big fuss about stockpiling Tamiflu. So Tamiflu was the big antiviral that was going to save loads of lives, and it was being sold on the internet, and there was a black market in Tamiflu. Major trials had been sponsored by the manufacturers. Governments were stockpiling it, spending billions of pounds and dollars on it. But the papers were actually ghostwritten, paid for by the manufacturers, and academics who requested access to the data for independent analysis were denied. And to be quite honest, no one bothers with Tamiflu anymore, as far as I'm aware. It's we did have some in the cupboard in A&E, but I've never saw it used, despite people coming in with influenza. And basically, I don't think it doesn't seem to be used that much anymore. So it's just like fallen by the wayside, despite all these billions spent on it. Now, I'm not going to put all the references in for everything, but just to show you that this is all fully referenced, you can click on those, and nearly all of the texts that are available that we're referencing here are available free. So this is all public domain data. So that was 2009 to 2012. So obviously we've moved on a lot since then, haven't we? Have we? Today, despite the global rollout of COVID-19 vaccines and treatment, the anonymised participant-level data underlying the trials for these new products remains inaccessible to doctors, researchers, and the public. Now, that raises a question in my mind. Why is this not now in the public domain? The British Medical Journal, direct quote, "This is morally indefensible for all trials. but especially those involving major public health interventions. So I agree for all trials, and I agree with public health interventions. So, for example, they mentioned this trial here. Again, these are all available to look at. This is the initial. This is the clinicaltrials.gov thing for the Pfizer vaccine. I think this one is. BioNTech, Pfizer. But do check these out for yourselves, the details there. And I must say on these clinical trials papers that they are quite accessible. The information is comprehensible. Pfizer's pivotal COVID vaccine trial, designed, run, analysed, authorised by Pfizer employees. Now, no one's saying they will be biased, of course, but it would be nice to have some external peer review. The company and the contract research organisations that carried out the trial hold the data. Well, I wonder why the data is not released. Why would this data not be released? Why not leave that open to international scrutiny? Why not? I don't really know. Pfizer has indicated that it will not begin entertaining requests until May 2025. I mean, seriously? This data is not going to be released, or they won't begin entertaining requests to 2025? Of course, Moderna's a lot better, is it? Moderna. Data may be available with the publication of the final study results in 2022, so that may be available. But this isn't until the 27th of October 2022, so that would be the earliest that this is going to be available. And personally, I've been injected with Moderna already, so it would have been nice if it had been open to external statistical scientific review. Datasets will be available upon request, subject to review once the trial is completed, and the trial's not completed till the 27th of October 2022. So, a little bit better maybe than Pfizer. What about AstraZeneca? Well, it appears to be more open. As of the 31st of December, timelines vary per request and can take up to a year upon full submission of the request. So we could see information released on the AstraZeneca vaccine on the 31st of December 2022. Still quite a long time, really, isn't it? Regeneron's phase 3 trial of monoclonal antibody therapy participant level data will not be made available to others during the emergency use authorization time, point blank. They're not going to make it available. Should the drug be approved, sharing will be considered, which is, of course, is very good of Regeneron to consider this. So what about the antiviral remdesivir? Are things much better here? Well, the United States National Institutes of Health, who were the funders of this, say this. The longitudinal data set only contains a small subset of the protocol and statistical analysis plan objectives. I'm not sure that makes too much sense, but so the longitudinal analysis that seems to be available only contains a small subset. Well, my question there would be, why does it only contain a small subset? Why not contain all the data? Has this subset been selected on some criteria? We don't know. If we included all the data, then we could work that out. Now, in our view, there are no dilemmas. Now, this is the British National Journal, the BMJ, British Medical Journal, speaking again. Now, what they've said here is that, yes, these trials have been published in the peer-reviewed literature, which we've referred to, and we've taken a great deal of authority from it, has to be said. But what the British Medical Journal are saying here is that the editors of these journals have been in a dilemma. Should they wait for full data and full disclosure, or should they publish because we're in the middle of a pandemic and there's a sense of urgency? So they've had a dilemma, an ethical dilemma, if you want. And several of them, of course, have published, so they've erred on the side of informing the public for the data that we already have. But in the view of the British Medical Journal, there is no dilemma. The anonymised individual participant data from clinical trials must be made available for independent scrutiny. I would agree. US Food and Drug Administration Freedom of Information request to the agency for Pfizer's vaccine data has been made. Now, I don't know what the result of this was. I think as a result of the Freedom of Information request, they agreed to release some, but it would end up taking years and years to release it. So I think that's still being legally contested now. And I must say, I do find it appalling that this needs to be legally contested. That this should result to legal measures is deeply unfortunate in my view. UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, again, does not proactively release clinical trial documents. Why not? If they have the granular data, why is it not released? If the FDA have the granular data, why is it not released? The original data, why is it not released? Because this leads on to transparency and trust. And I don't know if it's just me, but transparency and trust have never been so questioned. Generally, I think, as we are now in 2022, but as regards pharmaceuticals particularly. The British Medical Journal thinks transparency in decision making is essential, of which, of course, I would fully agree with. Now, this is from the British Medical Journal as well, and who would have thought it? At least 3 of the many companies making COVID-19 vaccines have had past criminal and civil settlements costing them billions of dollars. Wow. And that's the direct quote from the British Medical Journal. So there we go. Who would have thought that these big reputable companies have actually had, what was that word there? Criminal and civil settlements costing them billions of dollars. Wow. The British Medical Journal supports vaccination policies based on sound evidence. Of course, we want sound evidence. This is not an anti-vaccination article. Vaccines have saved millions of lives. I have had 3 COVID vaccines myself, and I've had vaccines against many other things, tetanus, for example. Hepatitis B. I mean, I've been exposed to hepatitis B clinically, and if I hadn't been vaccinated from it, it's quite possible I would have caught it. So I'm personally very grateful for vaccination, as well as all the other childhood vaccinations and things. Anyway, the same applies to treatments for COVID-19, this lack of transparency. British Medical Journal saying data must be available when trial results are announced, published or used to justify regulatory decisions. In live time. We want this live time. We don't want to do an historical PhD in it in several years' time after the event. These interventions are being carried out now. We need the data now. What is difficult about this? There's no place for wholesale exemptions from good practice during a pandemic, according to the British Medical Journal. The public, they say, has paid for COVID-19 vaccinations through vast public funding of research. And we have, I haven't researched this, but I remember when we were doing Operation Warp Speed, there was $1 billion to that and a couple of $1 billion to that. I mean, this is, $1 billion is 1,000 million dollars. This is unimaginable sums of money that basically you and I are paying for. And it's the public that takes the risks on the benefit of harm and the balance of harm and benefits. Therefore, surely the public has a right to, and an entitlement, to those data, as well as the interrogation of those data by experts. Now, of course, giving the public data is not going to mean too much. It's not going to mean too much to me. But we have experts who can interrogate this and who can simplify it for us. And I would really like them to be given the opportunity to do this. Pharmaceutical companies are reaping vast profits, apparently, without adequate independent scrutiny of their scientific claims, according to the British Medical Journal. Well, who would have thought? This is quite surprising, isn't it? The purpose of regulators is not to dance to the tune of rich global corporations and enrich them further, apparently, according to the British Medical Journal. It is the purpose of their purpose is to protect the health of their populations. We need complete data transparency for all studies. We need it in the public interest, and we need it now. This really, to me, is applehood and mother pie. Motherhood and apple pie. Who's going to say motherhood's a bad idea? Who doesn't like apple pie? This is just so obvious that this is. We need this full data transparency for the world's academic community to analyse. So shall we summarise by saying I share the British Medical Journal's concern. Give us the full data and then we'll know. Why would data need to be hidden? I really can't think. Now, the question of New Zealand. I've had quite a few views on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a video now from Zach, who's going to give us a bit of a rundown, a New Zealand citizen, of course. So Zach, thank you very much, and over to you.
Hi John, this is Zach from New Zealand here, just with a quick COVID update about what's going on here. So there's a bit of background. We had a alpha/beta wave back in 2020, but that was only around 1,500 cases total. And after that period, we had about a 6 to 8 months of relative freedoms, while the rest of the world was still battling with quite large numbers of cases. However, in August of 2021, we had our first Delta case, which then began our Delta outbreak with quite a lot of lockdowns and the like. And it was only after that August Delta outbreak that we started vaccinating the majority of the population. Some elderly and critical workers were already getting their first and some second doses. However, the majority of the population didn't get their first dose until after this Delta outbreak. And now we have quite high vaccinations compared to other countries, with government figures putting us at about 95% first dose and 93% for our second doses. In some regions, like where I live, we're actually at 99% first dose and 97% second dose. However, boosters haven't been widely available for the majority of the population up until about November, December, and most of those first booster doses went to, again, the elderly and the critical workers. So the majority of the population aren't actually due for their boosters until around mid to late February. And so the government has actually reduced the amount of time between our second dose and the booster dose from 6 to 4 months. And even then, it's still mid to late February for that booster dose. So now we have got a few cases of Omicron in the community, with 34 cases reported yesterday. And with the Omicron variant, the government has given a new home isolation plan, which could see people isolating for up to 24 days if their family members test positive in the same household. And mask use has been pretty good. Basically, it's required in retail, hospitality, all government facilities, and public transport, in addition to all flights. And children 8 and up are also required to wear masks at school, and that starts in our school year starts in about a week or two. And finally, the government have done some modelling, which predicts that we can see a peak of up to 80,000 cases per day, which is insane for a country of 5 million. Thanks for this opportunity to give this update, and thanks for all the hard work you do to share the factual information for all of us about the pandemic. Thanks. Hi John, this is Zach from...
Am I back on? Got so many knobs to get in the right place here. Thanks, Zach, for that. Now, the main thing that struck me there, Zach, is 24 days isolation. If there's positive members in the household. Now, I don't quite see the rationale for 24 days. And I'm just wondering if people knew they had to isolate for 24 days, if that might be a slight disincentive against getting tested. If that's the case, no one's saying it is, but if that were the case, that would mean that the 34 cases in New Zealand are a massive underestimate. So I think that Omicron cannot be stopped without Chinese-style city lockdowns. That is not feasible. Therefore, I believe if you are in New Zealand, you're going to be exposed to Omicron sometime soon. I don't know how soon. If it's BA1 Omicron, it'll be soon. If it's BA2 Omicron, it could well be sooner, because that will spread rapidly. The 80,000 cases of Omicron a day could well materialise. And that would mean that natural herd immunity would spread through New Zealand very quickly. As in other places, of course, we will be worried about those that are particularly clinically vulnerable. But you have a high vaccination rate, so given that the vaccination rate is high and being boosted in February, and you've got to be exposed to Omicron anyway, the New Zealand authorities need to work out when to expose their population to Omicron, but maybe they won't be able to choose that because maybe it's spreading because people are discouraged from getting tested at pain of risk of 24 days isolation. I don't know, you're in New Zealand, tell me. Really appreciate people like Zach coming on, first-hand information. Zach, thank you very much. Do feel free, of course, to keep us updated. And thank you for watching. And if anyone there in charge of data is watching, please release the data for international academic scrutiny. Thank you for watching.